We have with us this evening Mr. Michael Wernick, Chair in Public Sector Management, University of Ottawa. Mr. Wernick, just first of all, really good to see you again. It's been a while, so thank you for taking the time. Thank you for responding to our request so quickly. It really does mean a lot to us. And I'm going to pass the floor to you for opening comments.
Years of Zoom calls. I have no submission. I have no opening statement. I'm happy to get to your questions right away.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to have to suspend for 2 minutes just for some technical issues. Please stand by. Apologies for that. And we will start with first round of questions, 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wernick, for appearing. In the response that you submitted to the committee, you indicated that you don't ever recall seeing a memo in or around June of 2017 entitled Memorandum to the Prime Minister respecting broadly issues around Beijing's interference in our democracy. Can you speak to why you don't recall that? Was it because you were receiving a lot of memos and a lot of briefings around interference by Beijing at that time?
No, thank you for the question. I left government 4 years ago today. I did not take any records or secret documents with me. I don't have access to document logs. I don't have access to my old calendars, and I don't have access to any records. So I'm relying on media stories and Google searches. And as I indicated in responding to the clerk, I have no memory of seeing that note, which is referred to in a media clipping. If I read it, and I probably did, it was 6 years ago.
Thank you. In or around that time, did you have information that Beijing officials were actively pursuing a strategy to infiltrate or interfere in our democratic processes?
Not that I recall.
And so you have no information that agents of the Beijing regime were assisting candidates running for political offices in Canada? You don't recall having any discussions around interference by Beijing whatsoever?
No, at the time, the main preoccupation was Russia. It was a month after the French presidential election, and we were very concerned about disruption of elections, but most of the attention was on Russia at the time.
Did the Prime Minister ever instruct you that there were certain topics that are not to be discussed with him?
Never.
And that would also apply to officials in the PMO. No one in the PMO ever told you about that? That there are certain topics not to discuss?
I didn't take direction from the political staff of the Prime Minister.
But did anyone ever instruct you to do that, even if you didn't take direction?
No,
okay.
Never.
Thank you. Are you aware of anyone in the PMO or the public Service ever intentionally withholding any national security information from the Prime Minister?
No.
Okay. With respect to the daily intelligence brief prepared by the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat of the PCO, aside from the Prime Minister, who receives that daily intelligence brief?
I don't know the answer to that. You probably should ask Mr. Jean when he appears. There was a distribution list to people within Privy Council office and some other departments of people that had the appropriate security clearance.
Now, in your response, you make reference to the document logging system at PCO and indicated that the committee could ask for extracts as a means to get more information or to track down this particular memo of June of 2017. Do you have any comments with respect to the parameters in which to undertake a search of that logging system? I mean, how would you go about that?
I think you'd have to ask the Privy Council office that. I'm just aware that notes went from the Privy Council office to the Prime Minister's office. They were logged out from us and in from them.
And through you, Madam Chair, we had a fairly straightforward request of the PCO regarding dates in which the Prime Minister was briefed. Do you have any, it took a month for it to be produced, do you have any comment about how long, what kind of a turnaround time we could expect from a request of a search of that system?
I can't really speak to how they work now. I left 4 years ago. You'd really have to ask the current Privy Council office.
Decides what information is assembled into the Prime Minister's daily reading package?
There are a variety of pipelines of paper and notes to the Prime Minister, and it's the Prime Minister's office that organizes that and decides what to send on and when.
And what does the process of producing the daily reading package look like?
I think you'd have to ask Mr. Jean that.
On that. You don't know. You had alluded to in your response to the committee about a political briefing note. Does the PMO typically include a political briefing note on top national security briefings?
Ask Ms. Telford that. I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. When you were the clerk of the Privy Council, when the Prime Minister was briefed on matters of national security, would it be customary for the names of those present at the briefing to be recorded?
Again, you should ask Mr. Jean. When I was clerk, and I don't know how it works now, I ensured that there was direct, unfettered access from the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's team. So if anybody kept, minutes or logs or attendance or whatever, it would have been the National Security Advisor.
Thank you. Monsieur Frigas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wernick. I appreciate you coming back here, and it's, again, thank you for your long service to our country, and especially very important service to our country in the last role which you played in terms of as clerk of the Privy Council. I'm not going to ask you specific questions which would put you in jeopardy of responding to, perhaps revealing content that is of the nature that might be in national security. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about process, if I could. You became clerk, if I recall, a couple of months into the new government's mandate in 2015. Around that time, was there the government of the day set up a number of processes to respond to concerns of foreign interference in elections, as we saw in France, as you mentioned, the United States, Great Britain, United Kingdom, I guess I should say. Could you describe to us what were some of the processes that you would have overseen or very recently inherited in the role as clerk of the Privy Council?
Done my best to sort of reconstruct a chronology using Google. So I may get some of the order wrong or whatever, but yeah, I was deputy clerk in 2015. I was appointed deputy clerk by Prime Minister Harper and stayed for the transition and the early days of Mr. Trudeau's mandate, and he appointed me clerk in January of 2016, and I took on that role for the next 3 years. There were quite a few things in play at the time. A very early priority of the government, you may recall, was to create the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians, to give a group of parliamentarians with appropriate security clearances a window into national security and intelligence issues. So Bill C-22 was an early initiative by the government. And then there were a number of initiatives underway. So by the time we get to 2017, which I know is the period of interest here, there were quite a few things in play. C-59, which was the comprehensive overhaul of national security legislation, would have been in play in late 16 and early 17. And we were very concerned about disinformation issues. It's a matter of public record that Putin's Russia tried to disrupt the French election in May of 2017, that they tried to disrupt the German election in September of 2017. At the time, cybersecurity was a huge issue. Members that have been here long enough will remember Chinese cyber attacks on the National Research Council that were called out by the Harper government, by Minister Baird in early 2014. Personal focus for me very much was on cybersecurity, secure communications for the Prime Minister, secure communications for the Cabinet, and investments in cybersecurity, which came to fruition in the 2018 budget. I could go on, but that gives you some sense of what was going on at that time.
That does give me a very good sense. I'm not going to gainsay any previous government's actions because I'm certain they made the best decisions which they could at the time, but it seems clear to me that the new government at the time, in 2015, 2016, felt that it was necessary to add these new tools, these new robust options to help prepare the security of the government. Given your role as deputy clerk in the previous government, and again, I'm not gainsaying, but I just want to get an understanding as to why it wasn't as big an issue at that time. Did they feel that the tools that they had at that time were adequate to protect Canadians from this emerging threat?
The context is always different. So I was deputy clerk and helped the Harper government pass Bill C-51 late in their mandate, and then a little bit later I helped the Trudeau government amend it through C-59. At the time, in 2015-16, there was still a great deal of focus on anti-terrorism. And this is the time when Daesh had overrun most of northern Iraq. There were all kinds of issues in the Middle East at the time. So as Mr. Jean and others can explain to you, there were a range of threats which the government of Canada worries about, from terrorism to domestic terrorism to cybersecurity to foreign interference and so on. So that's why I have a national security advisor. That's why we have a cabinet committee on security and intelligence, and that's why the government wanted the NSI COP committee created.
Très brièvement, parce qu'il m'en reste.
Very briefly, because I just have a minute left. Now, the reason why we really focused on external security threats was it because we thought there wasn't a possibility of having influence within Canada? Well, you have to be vigilant on both sides. I think everyone here saw the attack on the Parliament Hill in 2014, and there were attacks in Toronto and elsewhere. So there's a whole range of threats against the security of Canadians, including terrorism and foreign interference and domestic-based violence also. Thank you very much.
Merci. Madame Normand.
Thank you, Ms. Normandin. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wernick, for being here. I'd like to put some questions to you related to the interview that you gave to Ms. Esteban on parliamentary affairs in CPAC about a month ago. So I'll be drawing on those questions and answers. You talked about the fact that perhaps it would not be ideal to have a judge, but rather someone who would have good knowledge of analysing the intelligent information that we receive. Is that exact, and why would that be the case, according to you? Well, that's a good question. It's always a challenge to find someone who's independent enough, who also has knowledge of the area that we're studying. It's not easy. We tend in Canada to turn towards judges for chairing inquiries. My experience is that sometimes it works very well and other times not at all. Thank you very much. And to continue on that, one of the reasons why we hear that we shouldn't have an independent public inquiry held is because we would perhaps be unveiling information that would be damaging to national security. For example, at the head of the inquiry, we had somebody who understands the information that's been received. Could we have some certainty that they would analyse the information correctly and sort out what can be veiled and unveiled? Yes, but it's always a challenge to find someone who is acceptable to everyone in a very partisan political context. So are there Canadians who are going to survive this type of selection process and actually be accepted as the person for this? Perhaps it would be more innovative to turn to an Australian, for example, or someone from the UK, someone who's really from the outside, who's out with the political scene in Canada. But you're saying that putting a brake on the public inquiry is not, in fact, the risk that information would be leaked. Rather, it's more difficult to find the right person. Am I correctly translating your ideas? Well, it's up to you as legislators to decide whether a public inquiry is necessary or not. There will always be certain limits in terms of the usefulness of this type of inquiry. One is that the heart of the matter is the question of intelligence and information that should not be disclosed because it could undermine our future capacity to collect the same type of intel. And then another limit is who are going to be the witnesses. Now, I know perhaps that could perhaps be dealt with later by convening a commissioner, but you also talked about the parliamentary committee, the NCCOP, and often this tool is presented as the best way of analysing what happened in terms of interference rather than having an independent public inquiry. So I'd like to know whether it wouldn't be possible to have both of these acting in a complementary way. Yes, in principle is the answer. Another possibility in parallel is to legislate on this. No doubt a public inquiry will recommend that we should improve our Canadian laws in this particular area, so we could proceed in parallel with a public inquiry. Any parliamentary committee, any interlocutor or public inquiry will recommend legislation. Now, when it comes to legislation, since November 2020, we've been asking for having a foreign agents registry set up. If it had already been set up, we could also still have a public independent inquiry on the rest of this file, I believe. Yes, we can continue these two approaches in parallel. There's just another 2 years left before the next elections, and I think the real challenge is to protect the next elections. Now, in the fact that there's just 2 years left, you've referred to the naming of a possible rapporteur, and we didn't know the identity of this rapporteur when you gave this interview. But we've heard a great deal of discussion around this rapporteur and the fact that perhaps there were close links with the Trudeau Foundation. Does that not mean that we're unduly holding things up by naming this rapporteur who would not necessarily give trust back to the public? So are we not holding up public inquiry that would actually restore confidence and actually tidy things up for an election? I think that's something that you need to put to the government, not to me, in terms of a question. Then, when it comes to the quality of a commissioner, I'd like to come back to that. The fact that a commissioner could be a person from outside who would have a good analysis of data, would that not be the best person to see whether the government, with the same information that they had back then, with this information they received, did they take the right decisions and take the right steps? Would it be good to look at this once again with an external set of eyes to analyse the information that was received back then? You can judge as parliamentarians whether it's useful to review the past or not. What I would recommend is that we should move ahead and legislate to protect the future. But as we want to learn from our mistakes, having a public independent inquiry, would that not actually prove that we don't want to do what's been done in the past and perhaps better prepare for the future? An inquiry, I believe, is not going to recommend what's going to happen exactly with legislation. A public inquiry will, of course, recommend that the Canadian Parliament should adopt certain stronger legislation, the UK model or the Australian model. It's up to parliamentarians to do that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And as always, all my questions go through the Chair. I want to thank the witness for being here today. I really appreciate some of the testimony and think it's challenging. This is a challenging discussion. And I think at the end of the day, the focus that I have is that Canadians are increasingly having a sense of distrust in our systems. And that worries me. So trying to figure out how to navigate this very tenuous situation is a challenging one. So I want to, first of all, thank the witness for his service to Canada. And I guess one of the questions that I have is just your thoughts on this, because I think process and moving forward in the future is the best way to move forward. So that I know that the President of the United States has the ability to declassify information if it's needed. For example, where the government has classified information that could be shared that would clear the air and allow people to feel a little bit more assured about what's happening. And without, of course, discussing sources or releasing information about methods of collection, I understand that there would have to be some careful thought done. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about, is this something that we should be exploring in Canada? You talked a lot about looking at legislation and moving forward, but I think about some of these situations, and it feels like if there is information that could be released that would not put anybody in harm, it definitely would not impede our relationships with other countries around information that we gather with national security. Is there a pathway so that information can be shared at a time that would sort of bring tensions down? And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that process in the U.S. and what we could have here in Canada.
No, it's a very good question. I think that is one of the motivations for having a committee of parliamentarians that can be briefed on classified information. It creates a dilemma, as we found, because what do those parliamentarians then do with that information? I think it's useful to have the leaders of the opposition parties briefed in and accept security briefings, when it's recommended to them. There is a mechanism. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that there are provisions in Canadian law for declassifying and releasing information. The guardian of that is actually the clerk of the Privy Council, which is the Secretary of Cabinet Papers. I signed off on releasing papers for the trial of Admiral Norman. I signed off on releasing papers for other reasons. I believe the Rouleau Commission that looked into the events in Ottawa last year, my successor as clerk released classified documents to Judge Rouleau. So there are mechanisms in Canada for that. It's always possible to amend those in future. I'd be careful where you go, because one of the conventions is you do not release the documents of a previous government. So, I was the guardian of the documents of previous governments when I was clerk, and there were requests for documents from the Harper government to be divulged for that trial, and I had to go and communicate with Mr. Harper and get his consent to do that.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. I do think it's interesting in the questions from my previous friend that was asking you. about in reference to public inquiries and having perhaps someone outside of our country be the lead of that. I think that's an innovative and interesting idea. I think, we've heard a lot of testimony that foreign interference is changing. There's multiple countries. You alluded to that earlier in your testimony, so I think it's unfair to focus on just one country in particular. We know that it is quickly changing and that we have to be very robust in our response and work closely with countries that we have partnerships with. I'm just wondering, as we look at this ever-changing face, is it something that we should be discussing, processes where we partner with other countries that we have close relationships with to oversee some of these things if it becomes a problem within our own country?
Well, we do have partnerships. We have the Five Eyes Security Partnership with particular countries and sharing of information and threats. We do share information with other countries. This is more Mr. Jean's wheelhouse. You can ask him about that specifically. And I believe there was a G7 initiative specifically on foreign interference after the Russian attacks on the French and German elections. So there is a collaboration among allied countries and democracies to try to protect democratic processes.
Okay, and so that it might be an idea for our countries to come together and talk about how we might address these issues internally. Because, of course, the concern that I think Canadians have is that there is a feeling of mistrust. And you talked about NSICOP and how it's there, so there is an avenue for discussion, but that information isn't public. So I'm just trying to figure out, how do we release information that gives people enough assurance to know that there is a response without creating this sense of alienation? And I think it's interesting, you talked earlier about having systems where, of course, all opposition leaders learn more so that perhaps that they can provide indirect leadership in their own caucus. I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about how these systems can work together, and if these processes that the Liberals keep talking about are actually transparent enough for Canadians to have assurance in the system?
Well, you will have to decide what the right balance is between protecting secure information and our ability to defend ourselves and transparency to reassure Canadians. That's a set point which laws have moved around over the years, and you can take another look at them and adjust where that set point is. I take the opportunity to say one of the things that would probably reassure Canadians about the health of their democracy is to see the political parties working together to bring in foreign interference legislation. There's no reason in a minority parliament that legislation couldn't be tabled, studied, debated, amended, and passed before Christmas.
Thank you. We will go to Mr. Culkins, suivi par Madame Romanado. Mr. Culkins.
And then Ms. Romanado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to our witness. Thank you, Mr. Wernick, for proving that once you retire from this business, you never fully retire. But glad to have an opportunity to ask you a question. You were the clerk of the Privy Council in January of 2019, is that correct? Yes. In your email that you submitted to the committee, you said that production of documents might be more illuminating to ask for the extracts from the document logging system and so on. In this paragraph, you say the clerk's office has always kept a log of all documents sent to the PM by PCO, which fall into two types: notes for decisions and notes for information that don't seek a decision. PCO constantly chases to get a return from the Prime Minister's office. Most notes are acknowledged or returned by PMO, but certainly not 100% of them. I have in my hand a document issued by the Privy Council office dated 17th of January 2019, the time frame for which you were the clerk of the Privy Council office, that says espionage and foreign interference activities. China is still the most active and sophisticated perpetrator of espionage and foreign interference activities in Canada. Espionage is the state-sponsored collection of sensitive political, economic, or security information by clandestine means, and foreign interference activities refer to actions by state actors, proxies, or co-optees that are covert, deceptive, or coercive, and go beyond normal or acceptable diplomatic activity and are meant to mislead or actively undermine the host state. This is a document that is by and large redacted, but I've read just the parts that I, as a parliamentarian, am able to see. And in your earlier answers to questions by Mr. Cooper, you led this committee to believe that you in no way remember having any discussions about Chinese foreign interference at all, yet I have a document right here from your office, for which you were the clerk at the time, that says China is still the most active and sophisticated perpetrator of espionage and foreign interference activities in Canada, which the document then went and defined. Can you circle that square for me, Mr. Wernick? Because it doesn't seem to. How would you not know about Chinese foreign interference, given that you were the clerk of the Privy Council office at the time?
I may have read it. It was 4 years ago. I have no recollection now in April of 2023 of having seen that note. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I just don't remember.
Okay, so in several responses to my colleague, you said that we should be asking the National Security Advisor specific questions, but your role as clerk of the Privy Council office would be to carry out any or to execute any instructions or prosecute any instructions that were given to you by the Prime Minister in cabinet decisions. Is that not true?
It would depend. A lot of them could be communicated directly to whoever was briefing the Prime Minister at the time. I ensured.
Does the National Security Advisor execute any decisions? Or?
As I said, when I was there, I don't know how it works now, there was a direct conduit from the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I would interpret that, and so correct me if I'm wrong, as a source of information, but the National Security Advisor would not necessarily execute decisions of the government. So is the National Security Advisor in charge of a department, in charge of several other employees who actually prosecute decisions made by the government, or is it simply the culmination of information gathering to provide information and intelligence to the Prime Minister?
No, the National Security Advisor is also essentially the chair and the dean of the heads of the various agencies and has the ability to contact the head of CSIS, the head of CSE, the head of RCMP, and so on. So it would depend what you mean by instructions. It may well, be I want to know more about this, or I agree with that. I did not get in the way of the traffic on the way up or on the way back. So,
your role as clerk of the Privy Council office, the Privy Council office being the nonpartisan. You were the most senior public servant in the government of Canada in a non-political office. Would you agree with my definition of clerk of the Privy Council?
Yep, that's certainly one of them.
So could you describe to me then what your role or what the role of the Privy Council office would be in any national security scenario? Because it sounds to me like the Privy Council office has, from what you've told me, has absolutely no role in either advising or executing instructions when it comes to national security from the Prime Minister's office. Is that true?
No, that's not the way to read it. I can commend to you my book from 2021, Governing Canada, which sets this out in some detail. The Privy Council office is the Prime Minister's department. The Prime Minister has 7 distinct hats and roles in government. Chair of Cabinet is one, First Minister in the Federation is another, international leader for the purposes of dealing with other countries is another, and so on. And Privy Council office is a set of secretariats and teams that support those 7 roles. One of them is the Security and Intelligence Branch.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wernick.
Did you want to finish that thought?
No. Okay. I'm sure I'll have more time.
Okay. Madame Romanado.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to, through you, thank the witness for being with us this evening. My first question through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wernick, in your former role, you were involved in the development of the first iteration of the Protecting Democracy Plan. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and what the impetus of that thinking was behind it?
So I can reconstruct it. We had seen Russian interference in the French election in 2017. We had seen Russian interference in the German election in 2017. We learned a bit later that there had been Russian interference in the American election of November 2016. And there had been in Australia a considerable amount of attention to potential Chinese interference in the Australian politics. I'm sure some of you have read the book that came out in 2018 in Australia on that topic, and Australia had legislated foreign interference on foreign interference around December or January of 2017, 2018. The question that was posed was if the security intelligence community becomes aware of attempts to disrupt the election, and it might be very subtle through disinformation. That was how the French election was attacked, was disinformation through cyber attacks and social media. or it could be denial of service attacks on Election Canada, or it could be a number of pathways to interfere in the electoral process. Who was going to call it out? If it was the minister of the day or the prime minister of the day, they were involved in the election campaign underway, and they would be open to accusations that they were either blowing alarm bells for political reasons or withholding for information for political reasons. So it was important to come up with somebody who could be the whistleblower on foreign interference during an election campaign, during the caretaker period. The alternatives that I remember kicking around would have been an independent commissioner or the panel that we came up with in January 2019. It was my recommendation to the Prime Minister that we go with the panel that was created in 2019 and has been in place ever since.
Thank you very much. And with that, I want to focus a little bit on NSICOP. So we've had a couple of colleagues talk about NSICOP, and often we're hearing that this is a secret committee, the secret work. You were there for the creation, and I was watching the SECU committee earlier today, at which the chair of NSICOP was presenting and answering questions with respect to NSICOP. I believe you were also clerk at the time to receive some of their earliest reports. When we hear the word secret committee, the connotation is that they're doing some clandestine work, that they don't want people to know about. Can you elaborate a little bit for those watching the difference between, some clandestine secret committee versus the importance of understanding classified information with respect to national security, our Five Eyes partners, and what this could do to the intelligence community if we're kind of playing loose and loosey-goosey with intelligence information?
The secret part of the committee is the information that it sometimes deals with. It's classified information, sometimes highly classified information. And there's a window for that group of parliamentarians to have access to it. There is a similar committee in the United States of United States senators. There's a similar committee in the United Kingdom of members of parliament. I believe there's a similar one in France as well, although I'll stop there. But it's a common practice in other countries to have some sort of window for legislators into the world of security and intelligence. I'm not sure I answered your question, but sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a little bit about aller devant, looking forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we've put in place the panel, we've put in place SITE, we've put in NSICOP and CIRA. We've seen evolving threats. At the time when we put this in place, we were looking at Russian state actors. We're now seeing that there are other state actors that are looking to interfere with our democratic institutions. Based on, I'm not that sure that you follow as much our committee, but based on what you've been hearing, what would you recommend to this committee in terms of anything that we could be doing to improve? You mentioned legislation, strengthening the legislation. Is there anything else you would recommend to us in terms of deterring, detecting, and countering foreign interference?
Question. The problem with revealing secret information, and there's always a desire for more transparency, is that doing that can reveal the collection methods. It can out your collection methods, whatever they were, human intelligence, signal intelligence, interceptions, and so on. And so, revealing sources compromises them. Any journalist watching would understand the importance of off-the-record confidential sources, and the risks of revealing sources means information would dry up. If we want to be part of the club of Five Eyes, we have to present that we have secure systems in which information collected by our partners is not going to end up in the public domain.
Thank you.
What I would recommend to you is you go to Google, you get the UK National Security Bill, which is before the UK Parliament right now, and copy and paste and bring it to Canada.
Thank you. Madame Goudreau.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wernick, I must admit that I'm very concerned about Canadians' trust. We saw a survey. I'm getting put off by the beep beep, but it's okay. So as we were saying, we've seen in a survey that 72% of Canadians have lost confidence in the watertightness of our democracy. And I'd like to read out to you an extract from La Presse on the 9th of March last, where I'm citing in a note to Justin Trudeau, the clerk of the Privy Council, Janice Charette, affirms that this register, because earlier you mentioned that it is necessary and important and urgent to have this register has proven its worth in countries. Without a doubt, you can shed light on the activities carried out by individuals or entities on behalf of authoritarian countries. So in your years of providing good advice, did you advise the Prime Minister to actually set up this type of register? No, not that I recall, but I strongly recommend that we should adopt a register following the Australian or UK model. Thank you. Now, earlier you mentioned that it was important to make sure that we have robust legislation, and I'd like to hear you on that. Have you already put forward suggestions to make legislation more robust? There are some stages that have been gone through when it comes to the elections with the site group and NCCOP. But over and above that, drawing on all of your knowledge, because now we're looking to the future together, what would you suggest for the future? Well, in the past, as clerk, I contributed to C22, C59, and C76 and investments in the budget 2018. That was a priority that I pushed forward. That was the budget that created the Canadian Centre on Cyber Security. So there were significant investments made in the CSC, the Communication Security Establishment, in that budget, and I pursued the creation of the protocol for the elections that was announced in January 2019. So that was always one of my concerns. And in June 2017, that was exactly the time when the government put forward a C59. Thank you.
Mrs. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair. I really appreciated earlier comments about we need to protect the future elections. We know that the past elections, there were concerns, but we know that it didn't have an impact on the outcomes. And all parties have agreed that is the case. So I hear very clearly about improving our laws, and you talked about the UK, just cut and pasting that piece of legislation and getting to work on that as quickly as possible in Canada. I don't expect that you're an expert on the UK legislation, but is there particular parts that you feel are important for us to address in your recommendation?
I do recommend that people go and download it and have a look at it. Basically, any Canadian law would follow more or less the same model, which is, first of all, you have to create a new offense and set of penalties, which leads you to definitions. What is foreign interference? It's different than espionage, treason, sabotage, deception. Is disinformation. You have to, the British law and the Australian law actually create definitions of foreign interference. This committee could recommend a definition of foreign interference to the government. You have to define what's a foreign actor. Is it always a government? What about foreign activities that are laundered through law firms and companies and think tanks and so on? Is the Confucius Institute or the Alliance Française interference, or is it just cultural diplomacy? It's not going to be easy to find the right definitions. The Australian bill had knock-on effects to amend something like 20 other Australian statutes. So you create all kinds of knock-on effects in the rest of legislation. You have to define whether somebody knowingly did something or recklessly did something. Anyway, I don't want to get into drafting, that's not my thing, but you can follow the Australian model and the British model, and you will see the kinds of issues that you as parliamentarians get to work through. There are 39 million Canadians. There are only 338 of you who get to write laws. And I think that if you work together, you could use the British law as a first draft, that you would be able to resolve these issues in a Made in Canada model in a matter of months.
I believe that's my time.
It is. Thank you. Monsieur Berthold.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, Mr. Warnock, thank you very much for being here. You've talked about preparing for the future a great deal, but I think that preparing the future means that we have to draw on the experience and the knowledge of people who have come before us. I've got a question to put to you, not to talk about a specific memo or a specific note, but when were you informed about the scale of the interference of the communist regime in the democratic system here in Canada? When? Well, when I remember, it was about 4 years ago, we saw China as more of a cyber threat, attacks on industrial espionage and the attacks on the National Research Council, for example. And there were certain investments of Chinese companies in natural resources that were very controversial back then. And there were discussions in Canadian universities back then about partnerships. And there were also threats, I think it was in summer 2017 or 2018, where there was something with an icebreaker, Chinese icebreaker. But in the electoral process, do you recall something specifically? Because the information that's been related by the media are quite clear and quite specific, and they're saying that it increased during the years where you were in office. The interference became more and more of a concern. So at what point in time did you feel that there really was an issue and that the Canadian government should become concerned about Beijing's interference in our elections? That was one of the reasons why I pushed for this, and we invested more in the 2018 budget because we saw this. So you worked on drawing up notes to convince the Prime Minister to invest in that direction. So you were directly involved in that. Yes, there were continuous discussions with our service memos, and when you're building a budget, it's a question of choices, and in the 2018 budget, there was significant investment made in the area of cyber security. If I recall, well, there was another area as well, namely to really get Canadians involved. That's why we created the Canadian Centre on Cyber Security. So I've understood that there were informal exchanges with the service notes. There was informal exchanges about the elections. That's what you've just said. So it seems that there were exchanges on interference on elections, and maybe that there are certain service memo. No,
Est-ce que vous avez
So did you participate in drawing up the critical instant public protocol for elections, which was set up for these elections, critical election instant public protocol? I was one of the authors and architects of this protocol. So this protocol never generated an alert to the public at any point in time. Now, you were one of the architects of this system. What do you believe would be the trigger which would mean that this group would warn the public or political parties that there's been interference and that there's significant foreign activity underway? Well, that's why we created the group of 5, a panel of 5, rather than just having one person, such as a commissioner, who might make a mistake. And certain members of this panel are the heads of the intelligence agencies, so they have experience and can discern how to read intelligence and judge whether it's solid, whether it's robust, and whether we should base decisions on this. And then on the other hand, we've got the clerk and I believe the deputy minister for foreign affairs, I can't quite remember, who could also give their perspectives to see whether we should actually speak out during an election campaign, say this is an election issue, but not intervening is also an election issue in certain cases. So it's quite a fine line there. And the protocol never determined that we should actually intervene and warn people that there was interference. Well, it states that there has to be professional judgment from this panel, and they decided not to intervene. But you can put that question to my successor, but they received the intelligence reports, and they had discussions, and they exercised their professional discernment and decided not to intervene. Okay. So is there a person or who has the final say? The panel makes a recommendation to the PMO, and is it the Prime Minister that takes the final decision? No. It's a role played by the clerk of the Privy Council, independent from the Prime Minister. The clerk is responsible for the continuity of the government during the writ period. They've got this caretaker role to play to ensure that the government continues during an election period. And with the transition of the government, that's all managed by the clerk. So that's a natural role to give to the position of the clerk. Thank you very much for that. Ms. Sahota.
Recommendations that I believe this committee can make and that the government can take from this meeting as well. I also want to thank the witness for the input that he provided to create the Cyber Security Center. Brampton has been able to, the city I'm from, benefit from some of the funding that was in that budget as well by having a cybersecurity training center, which I think is more of is needed. So some of the issues that also keep me up at night are these very issues. And having been on this committee for many years now, how to protect our democratic institutions and our democratic process, and how misinformation and disinformation and all of these things are affecting the way we act and react in our country, and has really changed and affected things. I was also touched very much by comments that you had made at the Justice Committee in 2019. You said, "I'm deeply concerned about my country right now and its politics and where it's headed. I worry about foreign interference in the upcoming election, and we're working hard on that. I worry about the rising tide of incitements to violence. When people use terms like treason and traitor in open discourse, those are words that lead to assassination. I'm worried that someone is going to be shot in this country this year during the political campaign." It's been over 4 years since you made those comments. Do you feel things have improved, or have they actually gotten worse?
For the flashback, no, they've evidently not improved. The political climate has deteriorated, and the power of disinformation has only increased, and it's something that we should all be worried about. Not easy to stop. If there were easy solutions to disinformation on social media, people would have put them in place in other countries. There aren't. And you're going to have to continue to wrestle with that for many years to come. What you can do something about is the tenor of political discourse among yourselves. I mean, with the greatest respect, I mean, I think Canadians need to see their elected politicians, you're the ones they chose, working collaboratively, respectfully, of course, holding the government to account. But there are times when the national interest is to come together and write the laws that affect other Canadians.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. And your mic's not on. Sorry, I couldn't agree with you more, but, through the last little while, even just currently, we've seen members of parliament having to step down from their roles and many of those types of similar words being used. We've seen you've been through a lot as well. When you were clerk of the Privy Council, you were immediately accused of being partisan, although you've served for, two different parties in your role. We've seen Maurice Rosenberg also be called a Liberal crony. The leader of the opposition flippantly also described the Right Honourable David Johnston as the PM ski buddy and neighbour. And so a lot of these types of partisan attacks against credible individuals and these smear attacks on long-serving public servants, it seems like there's no bar anymore as to where people will stop if it politically serves their purpose. And so, even with smearing the media, we're seeing now. It hasn't been helpful that, Twitter has created their own policies that's allowing people to now come up with other conspiracy theories as to attacking the media. So where does that leave us now? How would you advise that? How can we move away from that and really make sure that our independent journalists are trusted, our public servants are respected, and that our institutions are upheld?
Well, that's quite a question. I'm not sure that that's something where you can just write laws and write rules. That really is about people's conduct and behavior and how they choose to practice politics. The attacks go in both directions, and there has been a deterioration in civility, and decorum in this place since I was coming in the 1990s. I don't know what you can do about that other than, police your own behaviors and your own conduct and your own practice of politics.
Thank you, Mr. Warnick.
And with that, we all thank you, Mr. Warnick, for taking the time to be here with us today, for your service, and for making yourself available. So with that, we wish you a good rest of the day. We hope you keep well and safe. If you think of something else that you would like the committee to consider, please don't hesitate to send it to the clerk, and she will share it with all members. With that, I'm going to keep the meeting live, meaning I'm just going to pause and we're going to switch to the next panel rather than suspending and then taking time to start back up again. So have yourself a great day, Mr. Warnick. And Mr. Jean, please come approach us so that we can continue. Donc la séance.
So, meeting resumed, and for our next witness, we welcome Mr. Daniel Jean, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. Welcome, Mr. Jean, and thank you for being here this evening. You will now have the floor for an opening statement, and then we'll proceed to questions from the committee members. Over to you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this invitation. I'd like to congratulate the committee for this study. It's primordial that Canadians can count on democracy free of foreign interference when it comes to elections and also in its daily expression. But I've decided to focus on certain points. I'm happy to meet with you, but I cannot disclose classified documents, as was the case with others. But I would be happy to discuss certain points that are in the public domain when it comes to foreign interference that could be useful. I have retired in the last 5 years, but I'm still involved in these issues as a resident professor at the École Supérieure for Public Affairs and International Matters at the University of Ottawa and director of the CDAI.
July 15, 2015, 2 weeks before the beginning of the election campaign, when I was Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Office of the Protocol of the Department of Foreign Affairs released a reminder to foreign diplomatic missions of the Vienna Convention obligation not to interfere in the host country affairs. At a time where the public was not as sensitized on foreign interference in Canada, we were criticized for having done that, putting people on notice. In September 2016, one of the first important cyber foreign interference action targeted an international institution, the World Anti-Doping Agency in Montreal, and several of its international partners, including the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, as part of a major disinformation campaign in retaliation to WADA and the Olympic movement for the sanctions imposed on Russia. While many international media reported on the incident, there was no domestic media attention until October 2018, when Canada and other countries attributed the action to the Russian military intelligence agency, the GRU. Shortly after, the same GRU actors were back in action in the 2016 U.S. election. Similar methods, similar tactics. In January 2017, days before transition, President Obama declassified part of the intelligence collected by the U.S. national security agencies. His action had limited impact, which raised, I think, important questions for your work, such as the independence of the person who's going to make the intervention to release information, the reliability of the intelligence, because it was really fresh, and the timing of it, doing it just a few days before a president from a different party is coming out. In July 2018, following a thorough investigation, Special Counsel Robert Mueller laid charges against 12 Russian military intelligence officers of the same GRU. In October 2018, the U.S. and several countries, including Canada, condemned the actions of Russian actors in the poisoning of the Skripal family in the United Kingdom, their efforts to interfere in the investigation by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in the Netherlands, and the attack on WADA in Montreal and its partners, including the Canadian Centres for Ethics in Sports. U.S. authorities laid new indictment charges against 7 Russian GRU officers, 3 being the same that were indicted in the context of the U.S. election. Parlons un peu des mesures.
So let's talk now about these measures. These diverse incidents have informed several of the measures that have been recently discussed in your meetings, such as amendments to the election law, the annual assessment on the risk of cyber foreign interference by the CSE, briefings for all political parties, and we're conscious of the fact that these risks are also present in the analog environment. Similar actions have also been undertaken by CSIS, and these measures have progressively evolved towards observation mechanisms and the directive on the election intervention protocol that you've discussed over the last meetings and also with Mr. Wernick today. That then leads me on to the questions that were raised by the publications in Globe and Mail and Global News. I can only discuss the alleged information of June 2017 that appeared in one of the articles from February 2023 by Sam Cooper, and I did actually retire in May 2018 before the other information that was alleged occurred. So in this context, I would like to strictly base myself on my professional experience and as an individual interested in this.
To reassure Canadians that any serious allegation of foreign interference, whether during an election or in other aspects of our democracy, be subject to a rigorous examination. I hope that the various reviews launched will both bring light on the alleged information, but also, as importantly, and form the public policy on the required measures to equip the relevant institutional actors in prevention, deterrence, and the application of consequences. The proposal to consider a register for foreign influence deserves consideration, but it can be only one element of a broader strategy, as has been suggested by past reports of organizations like the Task Force on National Security of GIPSIA at University of Ottawa or the National Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. However, the reading of the various articles raised the risk of interpreting intelligence as evidence. I encourage you to read carefully the op-ed by Professor Stephanie Carvin on what intelligence is and is not. I have held a top-secret clearance for more than 25 years. While intelligence is essential to better appreciate a threat, very few of what we could see support action by competent authorities, and even when it does, there are often constraints on its use that may come from the needs to protect the methods, the sources, or the continued legislative shortcoming of not being able to bring intelligence as evidence while allowing a fair defense. In this context, your review and all the other examinations are critical not only to bring light on the alleged information, but in the interests of Canada and Canadians to develop the appropriate toolkit to counter foreign interference in all aspects of our democratic life. Merci.
Merci à vous. Donc, on commence.
Thank you to you. So we'll start with our first round, and let's start with Mr. Cooper, and then we'll go through the list.
Very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jean, for appearing. In or around June 17, did you prepare a memorandum to the Prime Minister regarding foreign interference by the Beijing Communist regime?
A few points. First of all, I've been outside the government for 5 years. I've been out of the PCO for 5 years, so I don't have any access to my records. I don't have any access. Having said that, even if I had, I wouldn't be able to discuss a classified memo. But I don't want to be seen as trying to evade the question. So I will be clear that during my period as National Security Advisors, yes, we briefed the Prime Minister on foreign interference, China and others, because of course it's not only China. And we briefed both in the context of larger conversations on China. We brief in the context of notes that we sent, and of the growing concern that we had, but also some of our allies.
Mr. Jean, through you, Madam Chair, I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to confirm or elaborate upon the contents of any memo. I'm asking very broadly whether a memo had been prepared in June of 2017, or perhaps even if taking your point, if you could more broadly elaborate on how regularly, for example, you would brief the Prime Minister regarding interference activities by the Beijing regime in or around June of 2017 or at that time.
Well, I was in the position for 2 years, from 2016, spring of 2016 to 2018, and we had numerous conversations on China. Some of these China did refer to the subject of foreign interference, and we had notes that we sent to the Prime Minister on that time that spoke about this concern, yes. And we also, if we had other intelligence tools, as you know.
And so you had some, among the concerns that you had at that time would have included, for example, Beijing officials pursuing a strategy to infiltrate or interfere with our democratic processes. That would have been a live issue in 2017?
So it's very important to see the threat of foreign interference by a country like China not something as is binary, right? It's not like it's off one day and it's on the next day. It's things that comes over time. During the period that I was in the position, our concerns were, a lot more on some of the issues like acquisition of sensitive technology, what we like to refer as economic security, and we took a number of measures that have actually allowed to provide more scrutiny on this. We had other concerns with China. Foreign interference was one of them, but it was not a period where there was signals. Like there's a reason why in 2015, the Department of Foreign Affairs decided to be more direct in putting on notice countries that they should not interfere, but there was not smoking gun. There was just like activities that we just wanted to make sure would not result in any kind of interference.
In 2017, the Beijing regime was the most sophisticated perpetrator of foreign interference activities in Canada. Would you agree with that?
I would say that at that time, we were a lot concerned about Russia as well. And I've just given you a couple of the examples.
I realize that, Mr. Jean, but I asked a specific question.
But definitely, we were more and more concerned about Beijing. And on the subject of foreign interference, we were in particularly watching what was happening in other countries. And you just need to go through open source to see what was happening in Australia in 2017 and what led to them to take a lot of aggressive actions.
And I asked a question, but I want to just build upon it in terms of the frequency of briefings with the Prime Minister, and I know some were oral, there were memos, and so on, but just trying to get a better understanding of how often this would happen.
Of course, there are several memos that go from the National Security Advisor to the Prime Ministers in a week, but there's not going to be several on the subject of foreign interference, and certainly not just foreign interference on elections, because I want to be very clear, and if you've heard my remarks, foreign interference concerns in Canada are much broader than elections, and in fact, intimidation and surveillance of diaspora has for some time been a major concern.
Okay. Did the Prime Minister ever instruct you that there are certain topics that are not to be discussed with him?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Prime Minister and his office have always been open to any kind of threats that I wanted to bring.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Jean. Mr. Wernick, in his testimony, spoke about mechanisms in which to declassify information. Would you agree with Mr. Wernick?
I was on my way here during that part of his testimony. But the only thing that I would say, I've given you an example. Actually, I've given you two examples in my presentation. President Obama decided to do it. We can determine whether the timing and the fact it was him doing this made sense following the U.S. election. And when Canada decided to attribute to Russia,
Mr. Jean, no. I just want to be clear. Mr. Wernick said there are existing mechanisms to declassify. Would you agree with him, yes or no?
Yes, there are mechanisms.
Okay, thank you.
And in fact, when we decided to attribute, it means that we are declassifying some information.
Thank you. Monsieur Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to put questions to Mr. Jean. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Jean, for your service towards our country. You play a key role when it comes to security of Canadians, and I very much acknowledge that, as is the case with all my colleagues around the table, I imagine. Since 2015, Mr. Jean, the government has created the NCICOP and site to examine this question related to Canadian security. Would you say that these bodies are best placed to talk about foreign interference and the measures that have been taken by the government, given the sensitive nature of the situation? And why would that be the case? Well, they're best placed because they have the necessary security clearances and they are given legislated access to that type of information. And if you look at the reports from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, they have made recommendations which are quite interesting in terms of foreign interference. Yes, effectively. And we heard that this morning. For those who are listening to us, there was a national security meeting this morning which had a very good discussion on this specific point with the chair of the NCICOP. Mr. Jean, I'd like to put a question to you that I also put to Mr. Wernick. You didn't hear him because you weren't in the room at that point. I'm not asking you to disclose national secrets, but just to talk about the process. The current government has set up a non-partisan group of deputy ministers. It's the panel on critical election incidents and the cabinet directives for public protocol and NSI COP and others. If it was so necessary to have these tools set up in 2015, why did that need not exist before then? And why were these institutions not created earlier, namely before the arrival of the current government? In other words, has the context changed? The context has changed and evolved. As I said, it's not a binary matter where one day you switch on the light and all of a sudden we see foreign interference. Foreign interference has been out there for quite some time, but now it's more systemic and strategic to push forward interests. We see this with Russia and the cyber side of things, and China with its influence using proxies. That's something that has evolved a great deal over the last few years, and that's why it was important to refine our tools and to continue to refine our tools. So if this was not so obvious before 2015, it's something that has evolved in the meantime, and that is why it became necessary in 2015. Well, as I said earlier, the Foreign Affairs Department in the past would not have come out with a public opinion on their website. I believe we're recalling Canadian diplomatic missions that there should not be interference in a host country's affairs. In the past, this was done in a general way. But in 2015, it was a very specific message, and because the Canadian public was not aware of that, so people criticized and said, why have they come out with this? We're not being very polite to diplomatic missions, said people. Would I be correct in saying that foreign interference is not something new? It dates back in time? No, it's nothing new. It dates back a long time, but it's evolved in its practices. Mr. Fergus, can we say that it's important? I think you've already said that, but I'd like to offer you an opportunity to go into more detail on that, because you've said that we have to adapt to this evolving situation. Of course, you're a private individual. You no longer have access to these documents or the intelligence that you had when you had your former post. But as a well-informed, experienced citizen, are there certain solutions that you would like to see emerge so that we can make further adaptations to our institutions for the future? Absolutely is the answer. It has to be quite clear that there needs to be a strategy. There need to be certain components within this strategy. This question of a foreign influence registry is one, but it's not a panacea. It's not going to cover and resolve all ills. It's very important to say that foreign interference is much more vast than just elections. There's interference when it comes to politics between elections. We shouldn't just focus on the election period. So there needs to be a strategy, and certain things need to be further fine-tuned and refined. Because, for example, this question that we've had since the India inquiry, where we don't yet have the legislative tools to be able to bring in the intelligence when it's sold enough, and to have that as evidence and protect it and make sure that there's a fair defense if we want to lay charges. That's a real crutch. So that needs to be reviewed. And we have done some fine-tuning, as Mr. Wernick has already said, when it comes to the cyber authorities in this national security law. But there has not been an in-depth review on CISA since it was created back in 1984. Over all these years, there's been an enormous digital takeoff. So many of these tools have to be reviewed and I participated in the report that was drawn up by the RCMP last year. Sorry, Mr. Jean. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Jean. We've heard the beep, beep, beep. It'd be great if we could be a bit briefer and not have to hear from me. I believe now it's Ms. Normanda for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. Jean. And I'm putting my questions to you through the Chair, of course. You've mentioned the fact that foreign interference is not binary, in particular Chinese foreign interference. There's a continuum. You've talked about attacks on economic security. When you were in your position from 2016 to 2018, were there certain issues, as far as you know, when it comes to coercion being exerted on people who are part of the Chinese diaspora in Canada? Were these part of the problems that you started seeing evolving? Yes, those were part of our concerns with the Chinese diaspora, but also exerted against other diaspora. Now, as this was already an issue back then, and we're talking about threats to the security of possible Canadians who are also of Chinese nationality, were you more in an analytical mode, or were you already starting to say we need to take measures to counter that? Where were you in the overall continuum? Well, within this continuum, I would say that we were taking our first steps. We were seeing more and more of these types of gestures. Although in the past, with certain countries, Iran and others that are not necessarily public, there were problems and actions had been taken. But when it comes to more recently, we were taking our first steps to try and counter this, but it's not easy to do so. I'd like to hear from you about the recommendations that you might have made to the Prime Minister on the way in which we could counter this. Do you have the impression that it was taken seriously, the information that you gave and the recommendations that you made? Were they being taken up, or were we perhaps rather naive about China back then? No, I don't think so. As of around 2015, we have to recall that in 2014, the Chinese carried out a cyber attack that we attributed, there we declassified information. We recognized that our experts had determined such and such a thing. So being naive about China, well, it was already starting to lose face. It wasn't expressed so much. You can see in reports that China's named, and then increasingly there were concerns about China. When it comes to economic security, there were measures that were taken. We just need to look at the annual statistics to see that a great deal of progress has been made on that front. And then when it comes to electoral issues, there's various measures being taken. When it comes to the diaspora, I think that's the most difficult issue. But without a doubt, Canadians who are intimidated or who are being monitored by a foreign state on their own country is unacceptable. Well, given that this was a concern that was already recognized and recommendations have been made, now we fast forward to 2023. And for 3 years now, we've been waiting for setting up this foreign agents registry. It was requested by the Parliament back in November 2020. So that was 5 years now since we became aware of this form of coercion being exerted against the Chinese diaspora. So how can we explain that the government hasn't yet done its homework? Well, I have not been in this position after 2018, so I can't comment on that. But to come back to what I said earlier, it's important to focus on more than just the register. We have to really determine where there are pitfalls and the measures that have to be taken. That's exactly what Australia has done in 2017. Let's be quite clear, they had much more serious problems than us. They're closer, they've got big investments, they're closer to the Chinese market. Internally, they looked at the big issues, identified these, and then they engaged their public and announced a whole series of measures. There was the register, but lots of others involved. Now, in your opening remarks, you pointed out the fact that perhaps there wasn't so much media attention up until a certain moment in time about interference, but now there's around 72% of Canadians who are asking for a public inquiry, and we've talked about the role of NSICOP, but we know, because the Chair McGuinty has mentioned that it's difficult for them to obtain certain information from the government. So according to you, For example, do you not think that these two elements would be justifiable to actually restore confidence for the public and also to be able to get a possible commissioner who would have more power to obtain documents, which means that we need to have a public independent inquiry on foreign interference? Well, 2 points on that. First of all, on the question of society that's progressively becoming more and more aware of all of this, including media, I'd like to be very clear here and say that the fact that the Canadian media, New York Times and The Guardian and other networks were talking about what was happening with the WADA agency, the anti-doping agency in Montreal, that was a sign that in the public we weren't actually aware about this. It's not so different from what happened in the U.S. with the foreign interference in the elections. There was a Washington Post journalist who said that they had the impression that all this was happening. They were drawing up papers, and then they wondered if somebody was actually manipulating them. And then, of course, all that was demonstrated in the inquiry later. So to come back to your question, I don't want to make some sort of comment on the forum, but my concern with the public inquiry is the time that this would take, whereas I think there's a whole series of urgent measures that need to be taken. Thank you very much for that. Madam Blaney, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And of course, everything that I say goes through the Chair. And I want to thank the witness for testifying here today. I'm really happy you're here because I'm hoping that you'll be able to clarify something. So I've been asking about the ability of the President of the United States to declassify information as needed. So where there's a situation that classified information could be provided that would clear the air on an issue that is important to the country, they have the ability to declassify it without disclosing any sources or any methods of gathering that information. So I did ask that question of Ms. Telford, and she said that she has been asking herself about that. I am paraphrasing. And then when I asked a similar question of Mr. Wernick, he said that it can happen. And then in your testimony, you gave some specific examples of how that happened. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is just if you could outline, maybe not the details, but the process of how that would happen. And maybe give me a little bit of clarity about what rules we already have in Canada. And is there, in your opinion, anything that we need to change or explore around this issue? Because what I would hate to have happen is information to be classified, rightly so, but if that information was somewhat revealed, it would lessen the temperature in this country, provide Canadians with a little assurance, and because we don't have the right tools, which I'm now confused about, if we do have the right tools, could you enlighten? Is there anything we need to add to that tool to make it stronger in the future?
So just to be clear, in the positions that I've been in, I have never been in the intelligence collection or custodian role. I've always been as a consumer. So I'm not necessarily the best authority on this. It was a question that would be much better addressed to David Vigneault or to Caroline Xavier at CSE. Having said that, in general terms, what happens is if we somehow see that it is in the public interest to, when we say declassify, that doesn't mean we're going to go and give you the document. That just means that we're going to take the decision of some of that information is classified, we're going to render that public because we think it's in the interest to do. Like was done in 2014 in the context of the attack on the National Research Council, like was done in the context of the attribution that I spoke about in my remarks. Our system is very different. Those decisions don't usually come from the political side. They usually will be conversations where the officials will provide advice on, would that be in the public interest? What would be the pros and cons, and they have their own process to do this. But it's as I said, it's been done. It's never like here's the note and read it, or here's the piece of intelligence and read it. But it's just in that piece of intelligence, that element, we are rendered that public because we want the public to know, and that's why we're taking these actions. An example is in the context of Skripal in March 2018, when we joined many other countries in attributing to Russia, we PNG'd 4 Russians. And in the press communication, the Prime Minister explained that these people had been involved in foreign interference activities on Canadian soil.
Okay, thank you. That provides a little bit of guidance for me. So we did hear, and I heard your comments earlier on concerns that you have about a public inquiry. I personally think that it's still needed because we're at a point now where Canadians are feeling so much concern. I don't know how else we can do this. And it's too bad we got to this point, quite frankly. But here we are, and I think that a public inquiry is important. However, I also heard very clearly from Mr. Wernick that legislation is another component, that something that could be public and shared with Canadians. His recommendation, of course, was to sort of cut and paste what the UK is providing. But I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on what kind of steps do we need to take in this country, especially in the specific issue that we are in today. And I know you don't have any classified or very important information because you're not doing the same work as you used to, but from that perspective that you were in these roles prior, what kind of things do you think would be important for us to look at in terms of legislation? Do you think the UK is the best place to start? Is there any other countries that are doing things that are innovative and things that would be important for Canada to do to deal with this issue?
Okay. As a start, I would say drawing on the work of the GIPSIA Task Force on National Security last year, on the letter that was issued yesterday by the the Conference of Defense Association, Canada needs to recognize that we're living in a different world. And as much as we want our world to remain free, safe, and our privacy to be protected, we need to find the ways to give better tools for our national and security intelligence and others, like Elections Canada and all that. So, secondly, the best, I actually like when we do legislation when we take the best of all, like not just looking at one country, but look at the best in one and best the others. Definitely foreign registry. In most countries, they review national security every 3 years. We haven't reviewed the CSIS Act since 1984. We should have regular review. The review should not about just looking mechanically at the legislation, bring new measures.
Merci. Thank you. We will now go to, Mr. Culkin or Mr. Berthold? Mr. Berthold, suivi par...
Mr. Berthold, followed by Mr. Berthold, twice. Good evening, Mr. Jean. Earlier, you opened a door. You said we shouldn't just focus on election periods, but focus more between elections for political parties. Do you have something specific to say on that? Democracy is more than just the election. I deeply believe in democracy, and I hope that democracy is more than just an election period. Now, were you made aware of certain points? Is that a warning that you're making to us? For example, the question of intimidation of diaspora people who are trying to approach people, political or elsewhere, or questions of funding. Yes, it can be questions of funding as well. And I've read the testimonies from different people, and if I remember correctly, I think that Mr. Perrault and Ms. Sima certainly talked about the fact that the mechanisms are relate strictly to the elections. Now, drawing on your experience, from all of the intelligence agencies, you receive intelligence such as the National Security Council. So you're the one who compiles all of that information, and then you report to the PMO. Is that correct? When you were in that position? Well, in our governance model, the Privy Council is the one who advises the Prime Minister. So in this role, using what I receive, I give advice within that area, and I played a coordination role with these agencies because Mr. Wernick was clear that it wasn't him. It was you who did that. Yes, absolutely is the answer. So is it reasonable to suggest that since you left, since 2018, the Prime Minister was only briefed 6 times on foreign election interference? I don't think that I can comment on that. 6 times in 4 years or 3 years on foreign interference, official briefings from the National Security Advisor. Well, it's not so much about the frequency, but making sure that the right information is there, because we've got limited time to brief the Prime Minister on certain subjects. Yes, I understand there's some hesitation there. I've heard that in your answer. It doesn't seem to be that many. Well, for example, we have briefing on China. We talk about foreign interference, but the briefing time isn't on Chinese foreign interference. So the fact that it's just been talked about 6 times doesn't seem very much. No, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to put another series of questions to you, which are hypothetical in nature. If, for example, the CSIS had prepared documents which gave intelligence on diplomats that were acting on behalf of a foreign state to support a political party candidate in an election, is that something that the National Security Advisor would have told the PMO about? Well, that's very hypothetical. Yes, because when we deal with intelligence, as my former colleague, Mr. Vigneault, has said, first of all, we have to check it out before we pass it on. So if we think that the information is reliable, and I really would encourage you to read this, but if it is reliable, then if it's important for the Prime Minister to know this, which can allow certain action to be taken, then yes. Mr. Wernick also said that it wasn't up to him nor the Privy Council to take action, but then he said that it was also the role of the National Security Advisor who had the authority to engage action. Is that correct? The National Security Advisor does not have authority. He doesn't actually take action. It's the agencies that take action. The National Security Advisor will put the agencies together to have a discussion to see whether there's something there which would justify them to have action within their competence network. The National Security Advisor will decide whether it's important to notify the Prime Minister and at least keep them informed, but it's not the National Security Advisor that takes the action. Well, I was quite surprised because Mr. Wernick said something rather different, where he said that the National Security Advisor came from the top down through the National Security Advisor. Yes, absolutely information, but now you're talking about action. That's different. Well, it was information to take action. That was the question that we put to Mr. Wernick. Let's be quite clear when it talks about bringing information to the Prime Minister. If it's credible and reliable, and if the Prime Minister has to know it, then of course it's the National Security Advisor. But that's different from taking action. If hypothetically a foreign state, this is my last one, Mr. Jean, if we learn through an agent that decides to render public his dissatisfaction because it's not going so fast as we've seen in one operation. So how is a National Security Advisor going to react to that type of publication? I have read the letter that was written by that man to the Globe and Mail, okay? And when we read his letter, he's saying himself that he's a bit disappointed about what's happening because it's not what he wanted. Now, I cannot support that type of approach. There's different means. When we have discussions on intelligence internally, as a senior person, we accept being challenged. It is possible to have that sort of discussion. What I'm very, very afraid about in terms of the need to refine our measures is that when we get to the heart of the matter, and if we see that, as many people have already said, if we didn't really need to take action, is that actually going to tarnish CSIS or wherever the leak came from? Because we don't know where the leak came from, but is it going to tarnish the CSIS and make it even more difficult to actually get the right tools? We have to remember that when the CSIS was created back in 1984, it came with certain constraints. I could talk about that with another question. I don't have any more, says Mr. Beltold. No, I don't know if you've got a coupon or something, that you want something, but it's the second time that you've overshot, and so the next time the Conservative Party will not be able to receive its full allocation because of that overshoot. Ms. Sayota.
Mr. Jean, we've heard from you in your remarks earlier today that foreign interference is not just prevalent at election time, but it occurs between elections, that many are affected by this. Many aspects of our society, such as our businesses, our charities, our post-secondary institutions, research institutions, members of parliament, diaspora groups particularly, are communities that are often targeted by foreign interference. Often those that have escaped regimes can then find themselves targeted here at home in Canada. So the threat is far-reaching. You've mentioned, some countries such as China and Russia that we should be aware of. Are there other countries, other foreign state actors that we should be conscious of? And do you have any advice to these different to diaspora groups and these different aspects that are affected?
So the countries that the CSIS, got to switch language now, as identified are these two countries publicly, as much as they do recognize that there are others. So I'm going to stick to what they've said publicly. I think it's very important that when members of the diaspora, and as you can see, it seems it's happening in other countries as well, if you've read what happened in New York this week. I think it's very important when members of the diaspora feel that they're under threat, intimidation by foreign agents, that they be able to come in confidence and trust to our national security community agencies.
And that's it. So we should create a mechanism, is your advice, wherein they can come and privately, confidentially be able to share that information. There
Well,
should be
in
some kind of
theory
initiative.
right now, they can do this, and some of them do, because I know I've had conversations with some of the diaspora groups saying that they do. Some of them feel that it's not always taken as serious as it is. The challenge is always what I've said before, is you may have information, but is that going to be solid enough, sufficient enough that it can support an action? And this is where some of our current legislative tools need to be refined.
You've also mentioned in your comments or your answers to questions here today that misinformation can be coordinated as it's related to stories that come out into the media as well, that sometimes, pieces of intelligence can be misconstrued, or there could be an active coordinated misinformation campaign. Can you talk to us about ways that misinformation can be mixed or pushed out to distort facts that drive a narrative of the day?
So the WADA example was a good example, because what they did, they act the medical exemption registry of WADA. So athletes that have a medical exemption to take a certain medication. So let's take an example because it's public. Simone Biles, the gymnast who's won so many gold medals, she was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder when she was a child, and she takes medication for that. Because it's justified, she has an exemption. The Russian released that information. They released some information about some other athletes, including Canadian athletes like Kristen Sinclair. And then their narrative was, oh, if you're a gymnast, taking that kind of medication can really focus your attention. That's our disinformation campaign. It's very similar to the tactic that they've used in showing the conflicts between the Bernie Sanders and the Clinton camps in the U.S.
Thank you. Is there any other information that you think this committee should be aware of? Many experts have come before us and said that, because the issue of classified information is so tricky to deal with in a public forum, that a public inquiry may not, although the public may be feeling the need for one, and politicians may be pushing for one, that it may not get the answers to the public that they wish to have. What are other things that you think we should explore? Legislation has been mentioned, the registry, anything other than that we should be looking at?
So you need awareness, right? You need some of the tools that I've described before, but on awareness, I give a lot of conferences to universities and conferences on national security, and I always say the crown jewels used to be in the government. So our security agencies were all trying to protect. Nowadays, the targets are outside government, so the national security agencies need to adapt to that.
Thank you. Madame Goudreau?
Madame Goudreau. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Mr. Jean. I'd like to get your opinion of what the former director of the elections, Mr. Kingsley, said to Radio-Canada, reacting to the different leaks on foreign interference. On our site, he said that Canadians have to know everything about what happened unless we have a public inquiry. We're just going to have it drip by drip and the public will pay an enormous price. Is that the only way in which we can really get out of this? I think that Canadians need to be reassured if the allegations were founded. Well, lots of people said that they haven't met the threshold, so that's why you're saying perhaps the threshold is too high. The threshold is high for valid reasons, but Canadians have the right to know whether they should or not have been informed given this information. So that's in the very short term. But what I'm interested in is the fact that the toolbox with these instruments is not up to date. Public inquiry in general takes a few years, and sometimes there are recommendations. Well, there's one of the tools that we still don't have with Air India. Now, that dates back a few decades already. And that's what bothers me with public inquiries. I think there's other means of finding credible ways. I understand that people want to do this in a credible way to determine whether the right action has been taken or not. But is it not possible to go more quickly towards solutions because the legislative process takes time already? Well, on that point, I'm putting this question to you. Earlier, we talked about doing this in parallel. What can we do simultaneously? So earlier you were saying that the public inquiry is a long process. Well, 15th March, we've got a special rapporteur who's been appointed, and he's going to report on the 23rd of May. And we've been told in the committee that he may propose a public inquiry. So if that's in parallel, and we know that the legislative process can take up to 18 months as well. And then, of course, we've had advice in the past already as well, because I hope that all of the good actions that have been taken are continuing in the meantime. So what is the winning solution? I'm talking about a strategy about what we can do administratively, briefing political parties and improving awareness raising with communities. You don't need to have legislation to do that. Let's start with these actions. Let's identify the legislative tools that we need. We've talked about several of these today, and most of these elements are in reports that have already been written. So to reassure people minimally, the public inquiry will contribute to that because it will be done out in the light. Well, as I said, I prefer not to interfere in that debate myself.
Well, thank you, Chair. Well, I think I'll just comment that I agree that 1984 was a long time ago, and with the changes that we're seeing around the planet, we really need to update that piece of legislation. One of the things that I do want to come back to is the fact that what foreign interference means as it comes out is it has a huge impact on those people that are in our country already who may have been here for generations, that come from those ethnic backgrounds. And I know that there's a long history in Canada of Chinese Canadians coming forward for a very long time, speaking about concerns that they had and really advocating at all levels to draw attention to Canada to these concerns. And so it concerns me greatly that a lot of these communities are facing really profound discrimination. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that reality and the work that you did do. How was that considered in terms of creating safety within our country as we're dealing with issues outside of our country?
So, first of all, I have to tell you that personally it's an issue that's very dear to my heart because of all of my 3 children, 2 of them have Asian partners and 1 of them Chinese. And I just had a new granddaughter who's half Chinese, half Canadian. Caucasian, I should say. We've tried, and I think that the agencies have done a good effort to try to reach to the communities. The Public Safety Department has contacts with these things. The Transparency Advisory Committee, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, there's a lot of outreach to these communities to try to create the trust relationship so that they feel they can come to the agencies. That's very important to report that. There are actions that we cannot talk in a forum like this that CSIS or other organizations will take a time to try to disrupt actions on things like intimidation of diaspora. But to me, that's something that is very, very important. And given the constant dynamic changes of Canada, even more important.
Well, thank you for that, and I have 5 seconds, so I'll give that back to the table.
Thank you, Mrs. Blaney, a lot. Mr. Jean, will you pretend like I have a coupon and give me 5 extra minutes of your time tonight? That would be excellent. Then I will not take some time away from Mr. Culkins. 5 minutes to you, and then 5 minutes to Mr. Turnbull.
As Monsieur Fergus knows, the only thing is you're keeping me from knowing what our local team, which is right now ranked #1 in Canada, that gets no Olympic, whether they're doing well. But
Somebody can look that up.
Far be it from me to interfere with the operations of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. But Mr. Jean, a question I have for you. I know you can't speak to the specifics of the June 2017 memo, and I'm sure you know which memo I'm referring to, but can you help this committee understand how often it would be that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff would personally ask you to prepare a memorandum for the Prime Minister?
I mean, you can't, first of all, during my term as NSIA, the staff of the Prime Minister's office, including senior staff, regularly attended weekly sessions with the head of the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat. And when they saw that there are things that could be of interest, they certainly expressed an interest in having more information. So that could happen in the exchanges. That could happen in the context of a briefing that I was giving, let's say, on China. And I would say we're seeing more and more challenges in terms of foreign interference. Would it be possible to get more information on that? But at the end of the day, you decide what information you're going to bring to Prime Minister and what advice you're going to give the Prime Minister.
So if that's the case, then what you're telling this committee is you pushed information to the Prime Minister's office, and the only time they requested information was in follow-up to information that you pushed up the chain.
No, that's not what I said. As I said, through the daily intelligence brief, to the regular general intelligence briefing that they would attend, sometimes they would say, oh, that is very interesting. Okay. Would it be possible?
So other than the daily intelligence brief, they would ask for follow-ups. There was no special requests other than that type of scenario. Is that correct?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure there's a number of files, not just this file, where we would have a conversation and they would say, we think it's important that the Prime Minister would be brief on this, and we would say, yeah, sure.
Could you give us any indication of how often you were asked by anybody senior in the PMO to brief the PM on foreign interference?
To brief the PMO on?
To brief the Prime Minister on foreign interference.
I wouldn't recall. I wouldn't know.
Well, was foreign interference a frequent topic of discussion when you were briefing on national security, or was it an infrequent topic? How frequent was it as a topic?
So, national security is a big business. There are a lot of things at play.
Yep.
So, foreign interference came in the context of conversations regularly, but specific briefings on foreign interference, a lot fewer.
Okay. But they did happen.
They did happen.
The spring of 2017 was when Ms. Telford's close friend, Ms. Ng, was elected to Parliament, replacing John McCallum, a previous MP who departed actually to become the ambassador to China. Was there, in your role as the National Security Advisor, was there anything about that particular by-election that you can recall which provoked any foreign interference concerns? Because there is some discussions in public media about the involvement of Michael Chan, who was Mary Ng's campaign chair during that by-election.
wouldn't be appropriate for me to speak about this one way or the other, even if it did.
So you can't even tell us if a conversation happened? I'm not asking for intimate details, but was there any concerns? Because we do have
No, because
we have
you're
information.
entering in real specifics, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to talk about this in an open forum.
In your opening statement, you said there was complaints about the 2015 warning given to embassies not to interfere in that year's federal election. Was it a foreign government, or was it more of a domestic
No, it was-
consideration, or do you remember who complained?
And I use that example just to show how society evolved. In 2015, when we issued that notice, we had a few criticism. It was in the media, and they were primarily retired former diplomats, senior diplomats, who felt that this was insensitive to go that directly about putting foreign missions on contact.
In your earlier testimony today, you talked about the importance of foreign actors or foreign states being able to survey or do surveillance on or conduct intimidation operations on diasporas within Canada. I'm assuming that also means the Chinese-Canadian diaspora. Is that correct?
It means China, any diaspora should not be subject to undue surveillance or intimidation by a foreign state.
Is it true that the law in China is that they will never extradite a national?
I'm not sure.
Do I have more time, Madam Chair, or no? Because it was about to get interesting, Madam Chair.
Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And Mr. Jean, thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony. So you had mentioned several times in response to various questions about the CSIS Act and the fact that CSIS was introduced in 1984. I know that our government actually added some threat reduction measures in Bill C-59, which was first tabled in the House in 2017. And I know those are subject to legal authorization. So there was some enhancement of powers, I guess, of CSIS and CSE, if I'm not mistaken, with regard to threat reduction measures. I'm wondering, in terms of your deep knowledge in this space and a review of the CSIS Act, which you seem to think is necessary, and which I think I agree with you, what specific changes should be made to the CSIS Act in your view?
The CSIS Act was written in a non-digital world. So what happens now, very often you will see federal court saying to CSIS, well, we understand you want to do that because the business is done that way now, but we don't think your act as it reads right now authorize you to do this. And the headlines in the media will say, well, CSIS blamed by the federal court. I think it's time to really look at it and update it. You're right that with the last national security station, they already had the threat reduction, but it codified how it was done, which one require warrants, which one don't require warrants. There was some minor refinements. The major improvements were on the cyber side.
So is there specific cyber-related threats and or strategies and powers or tools that are really needed for CSIS to be able to act? Can you identify anything really specific for me? I'm looking because I'm interested in what you would recommend.
So we definitely need to work on some of the major digital access tools, providing better tools, but at the same time that stay true to our values and our regards for privacy. And I would encourage both the government agencies and the civil liberties groups and privacy groups to work together on that. Intelligence to evidence, I spoke about that before. It's a major issue. We are very fond of the International Criminal Court, but we would not have the tools to be able to prosecute somebody in Canada. So that's another example. We spoke about the foreign registry. Mr. Perrault has come up with a list of demand on the election side. To me, there's a lot of the information that is there in various reports. We just need to come up with the right strategy.
Thank you. I know you also talked about public awareness as being key, and I know that in the four-pillar strategy, that was one of the pillars, and the Digital Citizen Initiative and the Get Cyber Safe were a couple of things that maybe contributed to greater public awareness. You also mentioned that the crown jewels are kind of not in the government anymore. They're out in society, and therefore agencies need to adapt. So are there specific strategies around public awareness raising that need to be expanded as well?
Okay, so you give me an opportunity to say more about this. What I usually tell people is the crown jewels now are intellectual property on the economic security side. The crown jewels are data, which has become a real asset, and data sovereignty is a key issue in many countries. We've not started to focus as much as we should on that in Canada. The crown jewels is the threat of manipulating information or manipulating elections, going into research in universities. So if suddenly the threat used to be primarily on your government crown jewels, but all these crown jewels are outside, the security intelligence agencies need to retool their approach. They need to be able to sensitize, and to sensitize, that's going to mean that some of their information they'll need to declassify, not declassify to the extent of giving the full kimono, right? But just giving enough for people to know what the threat is.
Is there a more collaborative approach with the external stakeholders as well? I mean, you seem to imply that in some of your previous remarks. Could you describe that a bit further?
Absolutely. If you take, for example, the cyber strategy and the measures that were brought, we worked very closely with the Governor of Bank of Canada and the major banks in Canada because it was so critical to protect our financial sectors. And right now, if you see a lot of the cyber attacks, they're coming through the supply chain. The one that happened to BRP in Quebec this summer, right? It came through. So you need to have good measures in place, and you need to work with them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair,
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Point of order. Just to inform the witness that it's 5-2 pour Gatineau sur Moine-Noranda.
5-2 to Gatineau.
Oui, moi je l'avais.
I had it.
C'était exactement le
That was exactly the same thing I was going to say in a point of order.
No, that would actually not be a point of order, but
Do you know why Gatineau does not have an NHL team? Because then Montreal would want one too.
Mr. Jean, you might be called back for something else next time, it sounds like. I do want to, on behalf of PROC committee members, thank you for making yourself available, especially as we are meeting in the evening. I do believe that your comments were quite insightful, at least for myself. And I do also want to commend members for just the exchange and the level of questions that were brought forward. It really does speak to the seriousness of it. And Mr. Jean, if something else comes to mind that you would like to share with the committee, please just send it to the clerk and we'll have it distributed with members. With that, we wish you the best and congratulations on becoming a grandfather. She's a lucky girl, so so you take care. Please keep well and safe. Meeting adjourned.